Okay, how is this microphone? I hear I'm still too soft, but what? Okay. Thank you for lunch. Thank you for just continuing to welcome my family here, my children especially. I really didn't know how it would be to have them. And now I can't imagine that I would ever have come here without them. So I do think children have a way of knowing when they are welcome, knowing when they are in the company of people who care for them, and I think they can feel that, so thank you. The longer I am among you, and the longer I am sort of living with you, the more I'm convinced that this is exactly what the world needs. And that you are doing exactly what the world needs more of, which is holding a space, welcoming the stranger, honoring its children. And today it does feel radical. It feels counter to what most people would consider a productive day. But I think it is some of our most noble work is to counter the false haste and false efficiency of the world. And so today has felt very important for me and life-giving. But if people ask you, what did you do today? You will say, oh, we thought. We thought about a couple things. But I do think it's one of the tasks of the faithful and one of the tasks of the world's artists to pay attention to what a mainstream culture dismisses or ignores. And for me, there is nothing that can repair what is broken, or can repair sort of what needs healing anyway, than the antidote that is poetry, so that we might all become more, gentler, softer, more compassionate, more permeable. And I thought I would use this final presentation time to present, simply poetry as it is. So rather than I tell my husband sometimes, quit when we do what I call bedtime bonanza, where I feel like we have to talk about bedtime for an hour before it's actually bedtime. And I say, let's quit talking about it and be about it. So I'd like to be about poetry and share with you poems sort of without a lot of commentary. And I need to preface this by saying that I wrote a book of poems that in most ways feel from a long era ago, some different life. And in other ways, I think I have just circled the same subject, which is maybe true for every person, that you have one story and you find a new way to tell it. Or you have one poem and then you find different ways to rewrite it. Yeats says that the quarrel we make with others is called rhetoric. The quarrel we have with ourselves, the heart in conflict, is what we call poetry. And in that way, it would make sense that we are always circling one subject, which is the heart in conflict. It is probably true that most of us learn our more valuable lessons for wider public life in the sort of torment of private life. So probably material for everything from sermons to essays, personal commentary that is shared for a wider audience. Most of what we have to disclose comes from what we have learned privately. And a short version that is the story of To See the Queen is that I had been very ill, depressed, but that word has always felt flattened, because it was not just like the blues. It was not just sort of sad, but it was a psychotic kind of sadness, true despair. And I had what doctors called a break, a psychotic break. And I think I went back and forth about how much I would share, if this third part would be a reading or if we would continue reading other poems. And I ultimately landed not knowing how I would be received or what you would be willing to endure. That either way, I was going to share this part of my life, if anything, by way of modeling what it might mean for someone to give a testimony or for someone to make oneself vulnerable, to stand without armor and say what life has been for me. If anything, I think it gives a kind of permission for other people to do that, not just in church, but at home and at your own dinner table. It goes back to what Jane Hirschfield said, why ask art into a light? Why bother if we are not going to be our realist, truest self? And so, luckily for me, you are a much more loving audience than my, demons had sort of prepared me for. I imagined you, sharpening your knives and throwing, getting your tomatoes ready. I didn't really. But I'm glad I've landed here, because it feels important to sort of resolve it with this disclosure, that the poems in this book chronicle an experience where I had much difficulty navigating this world, this real world, and another world. And I hallucinated, and it was this figment of a woman. I was living alone in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is a beautiful city, but which I came to call the city of broken everything, because it's a city sort of built in the cliffs of Virginia. And so the houses, it always felt like if the houses had like thought bubbles, they would be like, help, because everything looks like it's going to fall off into the ravine. Everything's saying, help, help. But it was a city of just deep despair for me. Like, in spite of this beauty everywhere and this cool apartment I had and a couple really good friends, there was something that I could not move out of. And I knew that I was sick. I knew intellectually that this figment I saw was not real, but it was also very real. The way when you are dreaming and you wake up to tell your dream, it is not less real. So the way certain things were true in your dream, conversations you had, or people that were in your dream, when you wake up, you know intellectually it was not real. And it was the most real it could possibly have been. And so this woman was real beyond any reason. It was the great also, the other reality. And she had a name, which was as unquestionable as her existence. And her name was Liliana. She told me that was her name. It was just always her name. And she was this sort of like royal figure that I lived with. You see, I don't know why I was nervous telling this. It's nothing, no big deal. Just, regular stuff. But there's still so much that's like doesn't feel available to me. I don't understand. I'll never understand it. And maybe we all have something, like that, maybe not like that, but something that's sort of beyond any ability to reasonably explain to someone, a vision or some coincidence or some feeling that defies all logic that you might tell to a trusted friend, but you would never expect anyone to really believe you. Gerard Manley Hopkins, we've mentioned him a couple of times. He has a line that it says, I will give beauty back. Beauty, 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 back to God. And I think for me, that became one way of thinking about prayer as response and poetry as response, is what beauty to return. What beauty was possible to return? It was months later, after finishing this manuscript, that I learned Liliana is a Hebrew variation of my own name, Allison. It is knowledge that haunts as well as pleases. The translation is God has answered. Eliana, God answers. And so in my logical brain, I start thinking, well, this is some alternate me. This is my name. This is some version of me that is outside of myself, and in that way, the fugue state, where you are outside of the self. It was also the first way I began to understand something of ecstasy, of a moment of clarity where the veil has lifted. I am seeing something as it is meant to be seen. I know that this is defies logic, and yet it is a reality. There is fact and there is truth. Sometimes they are the same, but sometimes they are not. And I think truth is able to penetrate questions that are beyond fact. I read somewhere, if you want to bake a cake, you go to a recipe. But if you want to know something about the last cake your mother ever made, you go to a poem. Or you could think of it as the engineering facts. If you were building a spacecraft, there are some facts you should really know. You should really get it right. But that doesn't tell you anything about why you wanted to travel to the moon in the first place. So I'm going to read you a few of these poems. I'm going to not talk about it, I'll be about it. The Figment. If I am still enough, I see Liliana, a figment. I try to tell her about sadness. I try to be specific. I say, God feels abusive. I say, when a lover said he no longer loved me, I felt I was covered in ropes. But then she vanishes, as God does, or returns in a different form, an avalanche, a ledge of snow, slipping from the roof of a warehouse into more snow. I think this is one way of living, slipping off into some indistinguishable state of more and more snow. But the figment is the same as the sadness sometimes. Wild gold and dark red, the color of snow under a street lamp, or smoke pluming from a house under a white sky in the morning, the color of a queen. I try to keep her even while she is leaving, and even after I know she has left, I shout, "Are you there? Are you even there?" Meaning God, but also Liliana. I want to ask her which is worse, dying or being dead. And then I can see her floating away as down a hill of ice. And with her she has one half of my whole being. She holds me high above her head, and I can wave to myself like a flag. And other times the figment is God. We discuss choices that would leave me not unhappy, keep the darkness in the near distance. But then, when I am on the brink, God becomes a crystal song, a hymn in the piano's high octaves. Or God is the smell of apple soap in the morning rooms, or the feel of sun on a horse's back, pure and kind. God enters the strange field of my mind, the way after a long day of silence, the voice trembles in the throat and enters the air like a shy animal. When I look at myself in a mirror, there is no answer. In one eye, God lives with me. In the other, there is the bright, loud world and my figure on the sill of a window. The worst part of seeing figments is not seeing them. My life is not so hard except for that. Alone in a world which moves around me as a silent film, or is too far away to touch, or is as a fantasy. I am as distant to myself as someone I read about, which is to say, the worst part of knowing I exist is not knowing whether I am or am not a figment. I do think some things happen only once in a lifetime. And if you are lucky, you might see the miracle, as the mystics do, the extraordinary in the ordinary. And I really had thought the world was ending. But then it was this figment, my own self, appeared, and my terror was less. And now I feel not cured, but healed, or at least able to attend to things, my sadness, my terrors, my anxieties. I can at least attend to them in ways that feel accompanied or held. I can at least feel less alone. And I am far less capable, less likely to do damage. It is not that those things have stopped existing, but I am able to attend to them with knowledge that peace is available, mercy comes, God has answered. I will read one poem that is one of the most mysterious to me. Called Bathing. I have been alone with the thing itself, the depression, the defective heart, God. Inside my mind, it is dawn. A wolf appears with a bird in its mouth. Blue feathers, my fate, that beautiful white throat. Elsewhere in Rilke's letters, he writes about all things coming to term. This is a theme in John Philip Newell's work as well. The world's pregnancy, the way we are giving birth to the sacred. And Rilke writes about every impression must be brought to term, every germ of a feeling, even in deep darkness. Unattainable by logic. It is the hour of descent to a new clarity. And I'm interested in that phrase, descent of a new clarity, because I think it points to truth beyond fact. And I think it is a mistake to work so diligently to avoid the descent. I think we work so hard to avoid suffering, to avoid pain, that it becomes a kind of enemy. And that if we can learn to attend to pain, fear, it is less likely to destroy us. I think it's T.S. Eliot who says that poetry gives names to unnamed feelings and allows us to penetrate our lives, which are mostly an evasion of ourselves. So sometimes I think, well, whatever the opposite of evading myself is what I do. To see the Queen. Since I was the one who had been ill, it was she who came to see me. Everyone wanted a glimpse of her. The people emerged from their houses toward mine, and with such caution, they made a visor of their hands. It was as if they were to be accounted for, wading the long uphill, little moving triangles, all I could distinguish at first. But the Queen came to see only me, and I saw her. And my life for a while was forgotten, and so repaired. Underground room. They packed me in by the bucketful, and then by the handful, until even my hair was buried in sand. As they drank their beers underneath the umbrella, my tiny face, a shell, was almost forgotten. Though the tide inched forward and the sand caved tighter, it was never quite unbearable, the breathing. And if the people moved out of sight or fell silent too long, all I had to do was yell, "Someone," and a voice would call back, "Yes." And it was not yet a metaphor for anything. The last of her steps descending, I can hear the silence of Liliana. Without her, soon it will be 1 hour, then 30 years. Gone the precision of her beauty, her humming in the attic. For now, between us, the war is ended. A slat of light in a half-length mirror. All that is left of a queen, but for her pillbox hat and her tea-length dress, a memory of the yellow bodice. I live on in hope, though for her to die inside me is not what I want, not exactly, not if time is what we have a world of, and not if the world is a bed I have made. As is true most of the time, there is always a longer story than the one we tell. But I think our real questions are the same. How shall we live? What shall we do? What is the gift I should bring? What beauty shall I give back? How shall I circle that primordial tower? What am I? What is my life? I have wondered about this notion of vulnerability. And the ways in which the X-ray and the nude are both examples of vulnerability. And there are different ways we have of sharing what is our story to tell. We do not all have to be poets of confession to be vulnerable. We do not have to have hallucinated a figment to have had an encounter with a miracle. We do not have to know our name in Hebrew to know that God has answered, is answering still. I came to give you one example of a life. God is at the center. And this is my circle. Lee says every poem is a descendant of God. I want to finish here and read one other descendant of God that feels too good to be true on a perfect day. Almost has felt cruel to be inside on such a perfect day. This should be a retractable dome, like the Dallas Cowboys Stadium. Is that the one? Take the roof off. But this is called The Summer Day, and it's by Mary Oliver, and it is one that was so widely circulated after her death that it almost became tired. But not tired enough. It's called The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Thank you for today. You have honored me.